Welcome, adventurers. Today on Rebel Then King, we are going to revisit my Barbarian builds to see how they changed as part of Player Core 2. But before I do that, I want to talk about some end-of-year goals that I have set for myself and the channel. I would love to hit 2,000 subscribers, 20,000 hours watched, and 200,000 total views. If you help me meet those goals, that will help me meet a combined birthday Christmas present for myself because, yes, I am one of those holiday Christmas people, which means, yes, I always got combined birthday presents, but this would be one I would actually appreciate. So if you haven't subscribed, please take a minute to do so. I'm actually pretty close to that goal. I do have more work to do on the hours watched and total views, so I will link to some of my other playlists, like the other Player Core 2 videos I have, as well as some videos like the Barbarian versus Fighter video, which is relevant to this, and that whole class versus class series, which despite the changes in Player Core 2, I think that video series still holds up because I didn't get super detailed into all of the mechanics, though I'll probably have to redo it at some point, which I'm realizing about all of my videos now. So anyway, thanks. Anything you can do to help me hit those goals is appreciated, but let's dive in. The Barbarian, the remastered Barbarian. It is still the heaviest hitter. It is a simple, effective class. It is still simple. It is still effective. It's even simpler now, and it's even more effective, in fact. Let's talk about Rage, its key mechanic. There are no checks. Unlike Panache or Overdrive or Esoteric Lore, this just works. It is a much lessened action tax compared to things like Hunt Prey, because you don't need to declare it multiple times per encounter. You just do it once and you are raging. And now you can rage on initiative for the most part due to the new quick tempered class feature, core class feature. I don't even think the Barbarian needed this. I was fine with taking one action to rage, but wow, this is a little overpowered, in fact, if you ask me, but you know, good for the Barbarian. What Rage does is it adds a bunch of damage, but it no longer reduces your armor class, another upgrade that the Barbarian probably didn't even need, but good for them. Grants you temporary hit points, which is awesome, though you still can't take any concentrate actions, which does limit the things that you can do in combat. The damage from Rage cannot be understated. You drop lower level enemies with like a single hit. You bring down a boss with a crit sometimes, and you still do damage despite resistances. Now, there's nothing that says you negate resistance, but what I mean by that is a lot of times the resistance level that a creature has to a certain type of damage, like let's say resistance 5, often means that you need a decently high strength and at least a non-1 roll in order to get past that. So you might be, let's say, a monk who only hits once with Flurry of Blows, and you've got a +2 strength, and you do a d6, with your attack. Well, you better have a good roll there, a max roll, or I guess not max. You could do as low as a 4 on that d6 to get in just a single point of damage. But you need a good damage roll often if you are not a Barbarian to get something through past resistances. But as a Barbarian, I mean, not much is going to resist your D12 weapon +4 strength plus usually 3, if not as much as 6 extra damage from Rage. And we'll talk about the different damage types that can be done by some of the builds now. As far as the remaster improvements, all of the updates to Rage that we noted above, raging on initiative, as long as you are not encumbered or wearing heavy armor, and no armor class reduction. There are some subclass improvements that we'll look at in the builds. So speaking of the builds, let's get into those now. Starting with our human AntiMagical Superstition Barbarian. Now remember, this was human, background AntiMagical, and it's Barbarian, and it is using the Superstition Instinct. I went with the Witch Warden Ancestry feat here. And I'll provide a link to my previous video that has a bit more in the full backgrounds and ancestry feats and things. I'm going to just kind of focus a little bit more on how these builds changed as part of the remaster and keep this relatively short. So really what we're looking at here is how the subclass changes affected this build. Well, now the extra damage from rage against non-casters increases from 2 to 3. Remember that as part of the superstition instinct, your whole thing is you don't like magic. So while raging, you do extra damage and have extra abilities against magic users. And well, you got an increase now to doing some damage against non-magic users as well, which is good because frankly, you don't go up against that many magic users typically. So this is going to be a big boost. And then you are also no longer need to like outright refuse spells cast upon you by allies, but it does leave you frightened, which I think is kind of fun at least. So overall, this build hasn't changed that much, but I do think that this subclass improved mostly by that. Well, both of those changes I went over are pretty good, but I do like that you get 3 damage against non-casters instead of 2, because 2 extra points of damage is not bad, but maybe sometimes not even worth raging. Although you do have to remember that the superstition instinct, this text here, once every 10 minutes when you rage, you regain hit points. Regain, not temporary. Hit points equal to the temporary hit points you gain from that rage action. So there is always a reason for this character to rage, but you get even more of it with these remaster upgrades. Pretty good. On to the Dwarf Fury Barbarian. This was a refugee that was forced to flee their mountain home after battles with the orcs. That's why it is a refugee. It's a barbarian, of course, and it is the Fury instinct, which is sort of the most basic, let's face it, of the barbarian instincts that does let you pick up 2 different class feats at level 1 rather than 2. 2 class feats at level 1 rather than 1. There we go. I went with Raging Thrower because I wanted to be able to throw some battle axes with this, and then Raging Intimidation because it's a good one. As far as the remaster changes, this is another 2 to 3. So Instinct ability, Unstoppable Frenzy. Increase the additional damage from rage from 2 to 3. So this in a way is, this really does make this the standard barbarian build, like the base build I would consider. 3 damage. I know it's only an extra point compared to 2, but keep in mind, this is static damage. That is not a check, that is not a roll, and that is on every strike. So that is a big upgrade, though I still would probably play most other subclasses before I would play Fury. Like maybe the Animal. So remember, this build is a human nomad barbarian, and they tap into their animal, barbarian, nomadic, one with nature kind of rage. For the Animal, I went with the Deer, and this actually got downgraded a bit as part of the remaster. So the remaster changes here. At later levels, you were able to add reach to your strikes using your antlers, and you can't anymore. Being a barbarian with reach was great. And you might say, well, hey, pick up a weapon with reach. You can't use weapons while raging as the animal instinct. So, maybe not that great, but you're unable to use weapons. Look at that. While raging, you gain your chosen animal's unarmed attack, but you're unable to use weapons. So I would actually have to rethink this build a bit. It's still good, and the things that I still like about it is I did plan on being a bit more defensive with this, if I remember. by taking shield block so that I don't have a two-handed weapon, as frankly a lot of barbarians end up doing, and instead I have a shield and shield block so that I can be a barbarian who can use an action to, well, 1, increase my armor class, and 2, be able to block some damage if I am hit. Plus that, on top of all of my hit points, 22, and the temporary hit points from rage, which is, not bad there. Could go with a little more constitution maybe, but, that part of this build hasn't changed, but it's still a little bit sad to get a little downgrade, especially since some of the others, like the Spirit, I think got quite a bit better. This was my favorite build beforehand. This is a Kitsune, Chosen One Barbarian. They are sort of a religious prophet who is charming at times and then terrifying at others. They're convinced that they're the Chosen One. They're not actually the Chosen One, is the way I'm playing this, but they still have some abilities from that are kind of making them bigger in their own head than they actually are, more important in their own head. It's a Darkfields Kitsune with Raging Intimidation, which I think fits the Chosen One background and the Spirit Instinct well. Now, Spirit Instinct used to do negative or positive damage, which was good, but you always had that choice, and you could choose wrong and not end up doing actual additional damage. It also felt a little bit to me, I flavored it as a little bit of like Jekyll and Hyde, where sometimes this character was very righteous and will smite the enemies, and sometimes was just absolutely furious with their enemies. And that's why I'd go from negative positive, but now it is just spirit damage. Oops, I clicked on Raging Intimidation, not Spirit. Okay. Instinct ability, Spirit Rage. While raging, you can increase the additional damage from rage from 2 to 3, it's kind of the standard now, and change its damage type to Spirit instead of the damage type from your weapon or unarmed attack. This is also cool. If you choose to deal Spirit damage, your weapon or unarmed attack gains the effects of the Ghost Touch property rune, which makes it more effective against incorporeal, I can never say that word. Incorporeal, there we go, incorporeal creatures, and your rage action gains the divine and spirit traits. That's why this one is my favorite. I think that this is a damage type that will almost never face resistance, though if you go up against a construct, which I feel like I've talked about a lot recently, well, that spirit damage isn't going to affect them at all. So there is that. Sometimes this wouldn't be used at all, but you don't have to change your damage type to spirit. You can. And for the most part, I would, because if something has a physical resistance, oh well, spirit damage is going to go right through. And then that ability to, that ghost rune ability is very cool as well. So those are the build updates. I think for the most part, the Barbarian got better. Even though the animal instinct does have a few additional, well, it doesn't have additional limitations. Well, yes, it does have additional limitations, but it also has some bonuses that are no longer there. But, you still rage on initiative and you still don't drop your armor class. So it's still a win in the end.